It was just another quiet Thursday evening. I sat in my office at home, tying up loose ends from the day. The hum of my laptop and the faint ticking of the wall clock were the only sounds in the room. Carol, my wife of 25 years, was in the living room watching something on her tablet. Everything seemed normal, ordinary, even. That's when my phone lit up with a notification. At first, I assumed it was another work email or a spam message. I reached for the phone absent-mindedly and glanced at the screen. The text preview immediately stopped me cold. "Do you really know what your wife does when you're not around?" My hand hovered over the phone. It wasn't a number I recognized. The message could have been a mistake, maybe even a scam. But something about it felt off. Against my better judgment, I tapped on the notification to open the full message. "She's not the person you think she is. If you want proof, pay closer attention. Check her phone. Look at her schedule." I frowned, reading it again, trying to make sense of it. Was this a joke? A cruel prank? I wanted to dismiss it, but something about the wording gnawed at me. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the phone. Over the past few weeks, I'd noticed subtle changes in Carol's behavior. She'd started going out more often, claiming she had work meetings or was trying to stay healthy with late-night yoga classes. Her explanations always sounded reasonable enough at the time. But now the pieces didn't quite fit together. She'd become more guarded with her phone, leaving it face down on the table whenever we had dinner. She had also started wearing new outfits, things I'd never seen her buy before, and spritzing on perfume for even the simplest errands. I shook my head, trying to push the thoughts aside. Maybe I was overthinking it. After all, we'd been together for decades. If something were wrong, wouldn't I have known? The phone buzzed again, pulling me out of my thoughts. Another message from the same unknown number. "Tomorrow night. 7 p.m. The Italian place on Main Street. You'll see." I set the phone down slowly, my jaw tightening. This time, I couldn't dismiss it. It was too specific, too calculated. Whoever was sending these messages knew something, and they wanted me to find out. I glanced toward the living room. Carol sat on the couch, completely relaxed, scrolling through her tablet as if everything were fine. She didn't seem to notice me watching her. "Something wrong?" she asked casually, looking up with a soft smile. I returned the smile, keeping my tone light. "No, nothing important. Just work." She nodded, her attention drifting back to her screen. I stood there for a moment longer, watching her. If this was a misunderstanding, I'd know soon enough. But if it wasn't, I'd be ready. Tomorrow, I would be at that restaurant. Friday evening came faster than I expected. I told Carol I'd be working late, carefully keeping my voice neutral. She barely glanced up from her tablet, offering a quick, "Don't overwork yourself." Her casual tone stung, but I smiled, nodded, and walked out the door. She didn't even ask what time I'd be back. I parked a few blocks away from the Italian restaurant mentioned in the anonymous text and waited. The air was cold, and the streetlights cast long, wavering shadows on the pavement. My fingers tapped against the steering wheel as I watched the minutes tick by. At exactly 7:12 p.m., a black sedan pulled up outside the restaurant. Carol stepped out. My breath caught for a moment, not because she looked beautiful, but because she looked unfamiliar. She was dressed in a sleek black dress I'd never seen before, her hair styled as if she were going to a gala. She laughed at something the driver said and walked inside without hesitation. I stepped out of my car, keeping my distance. My coat was pulled tight around me as I approached the restaurant. The warm, inviting glow from inside contrasted sharply with the storm brewing in my chest. I stopped just short of the entrance, peering through the windows. There she was, seated at a cozy corner table, smiling at a man who was unmistakably not her colleague or a gym partner. He was tall, sharply dressed in a tailored suit, and carried himself with the kind of arrogance that made me want to knock the smirk off his face. I stayed outside for a moment, gathering myself. This wasn't the time to lose control. Finally, I stepped inside, pretending to glance at the bar menu. The smell of garlic and fresh basil filled the air as soft jazz played in the background. I chose a seat near the bar with a clear view of the table. My hand tightened around my phone in my pocket, debating whether to record them. They leaned in close, sharing quiet laughter. The man reached across the table, brushing his fingers against hers. She didn't flinch. Instead, she smiled, soft, intimate, familiar. The waiter approached their table with a small velvet box. The man opened it, revealing a bracelet, delicate, gold, understated. Carol's face lit up as she slipped it onto her wrist, then leaned forward to kiss him on the cheek. My jaw tightened. This wasn't some impulsive fling. This was rehearsed. Comfortable. Practiced. I reached into my pocket, taking a photo of the scene. Her betrayal wasn't just casual, it was deliberate. But I didn't confront her. Not here. Not now. This wasn't about reacting, it was about planning. She thought she had the upper hand, but tonight she had given me all the ammunition I needed. I left the restaurant without being seen, each step firm with purpose. She might think she's in control, but the game had only just begun. The drive home from the restaurant was a blur. My thoughts were like a storm, churning and relentless, but one thing was clear, I wasn't going to act out of emotion. This needed to be calculated, deliberate. Carol didn't just betray me, she orchestrated a second life, one she thought I'd never discover. But she underestimated me, and that would be her biggest mistake. As I pulled into the driveway, the house loomed ahead, familiar yet foreign. Inside, Carol would be sitting on the couch, smiling that same disarming smile, as though nothing had changed. But everything had. I parked the car, took a deep breath, and stepped inside. "Hey, you're home earlier than I thought," she said, glancing up from her tablet. She had changed out of her black dress, now in sweatpants and a hoodie, like the devoted wife she pretended to be. I managed a small smile. The meeting ended sooner than expected. She nodded and returned to her screen, oblivious to the storm brewing in my head. That night, as she slept peacefully beside me, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The images from the restaurant replayed in my mind, her laughter, the bracelet, the kiss on his cheek. But instead of despair, I felt something else growing, a sharp, focused resolve. If she thought she could humiliate me and walk away unscathed, she was in for a rude awakening. The next morning, I began my work. The first step was securing my position. I contacted my lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Ellen, who had a reputation for taking down opponents with surgical precision. I explained the situation without emotion, laying out the facts. "She doesn't know I'm aware of her affair yet," I said, my voice steady. "I want to keep it that way for now." Ellen nodded. "Smart move. We'll start by protecting your assets. Joint accounts, property, anything she could use against you. Once you've secured your finances, we can strategize the next steps." The call ended, and I moved to phase 2, a surveillance. I'd already captured the evidence at the restaurant, but I needed more. If Carol and her lover thought they were clever, I was about to prove them wrong. I set up a discreet GPS tracker on her car and installed monitoring software on the shared laptop. Every move they made would now be logged and tracked. By the end of the day, I had already started piecing together the puzzle. Emails, text messages, even shared calendars, they thought they were careful, but no one can hide forever. I discovered the lover's name, Robert, a senior executive at her company. The same man who probably bragged about his professionalism while sneaking around behind my back. But the most damning piece? A scheduled weekend trip. Conference, the calendar entry read, but the hotel confirmation email told a different story: our romantic getaway for two at a 5-star resort. As I stared at the email, I felt the corners of my mouth twitch into a cold smile. This wasn't just betrayal. It was arrogance. And that arrogance was going to cost them everything. For now, I played along, pretending to be none the wiser. Carol kissed me on the cheek before leaving for work that morning, the same way she always did. But as she walked out the door, all I could think was, enjoy it while you can. This is the calm before the storm. The next few days were a blur of preparation. My mornings were spent at work, where I maintained the image of a calm, collected man. But in the evenings, after Carol had gone to bed, I transformed into something else, a hunter, carefully stalking my prey. Every piece of information I uncovered about her and Robert only fueled my determination. Their arrogance was almost insulting. Emails and texts poured in through the tracking software I had installed. The language was nauseating: "I can't wait to see you this weekend, last night was incredible," and even talk of future plans that didn't include me. The GPS tracker revealed their meeting spots, coffee shops, hotels, and even a park bench near her office. They thought they were being clever, hiding in plain sight. One night, while Carol was asleep, I accessed her phone through the monitoring software. There it was, a folder labeled Receipts. Inside were pictures of expensive dinners, hotel confirmations, and a photo of the bracelet he had given her, captioned, "For my forever." The rage I felt was indescribable. But I didn't let it control me. No, I channeled it into something far more dangerous: our plan to unravel their lives piece by piece. The first step was to hit Robert where it hurt the most, his career. I found out through his email correspondence that his company was hosting a high-profile gala next week. It wasn't just any event, it was a networking goldmine for executives. Deals worth millions would be signed that night, and reputations would be solidified or shattered. I made a call to an old friend, Tony, who worked in corporate security. Over a beer at a quiet bar, I shared just enough of my story to pique his interest. "I need a favor," I said. "Robert has skeletons in his closet, and I need them to dance." Tony grinned. "I'll see what I can dig up." Within 48 hours, he delivered. Robert had been misusing company funds, lavish dinners and hotel stays labeled as client meetings. The receipts matched perfectly with the dates and locations I already had. The night of the gala arrived. Carol had claimed she was visiting a friend, but the GPS tracker told me otherwise. She was at Robert's house, no doubt celebrating their little victory before the event. Meanwhile, I was at the venue, blending in with the crowd, waiting for the perfect moment. As Robert mingled with other executives, the event host took the stage to begin the evening's presentations. That's when Tony made his move. He discreetly handed the evidence to one of the board members, a sharp-looking woman with a no-nonsense demeanor. Within minutes, whispers began circulating through the room. I watched as the woman approached Robert, her expression cold and unyielding. The murmurs grew louder as others joined the conversation. Robert's confident smile faltered, replaced by a look of confusion, then panic. By the end of the evening, Robert was escorted out of the building by security. His career was effectively over. I left the gala unnoticed, my next steps already forming in my mind. This was just the beginning. Carol and Robert thought they could live their lives without consequence, but I was about to teach them a lesson they'd never forget. The aftermath of Robert's downfall rippled through his company like a stone tossed into a still pond. By the next morning, his name was the subject of whispered conversations in boardrooms and hallways. Carol, however, was blissfully unaware of the chaos. She came home that evening, her smile as bright as ever, oblivious to the fact that the foundation of her fantasy life had just been shattered. I watched her move around the kitchen, humming softly as she prepared dinner. "You seem in a good mood," I remarked, keeping my tone light. She glanced over her shoulder, her smile almost irritating in its ease. "It's just been a good day," she said, adding, "things are finally falling into place." Her words struck me as ironic, considering that Robert's world was unraveling piece by piece. I kept my expression neutral, even as the memory of him being escorted out of the gala replayed in my mind like a satisfying movie. The next day, I made my next move. Now that Robert's career was effectively over, I turned my attention to Carol. Her little world of lies was about to collapse under the weight of its own arrogance. I accessed the shared calendar on her laptop again, noting a meeting scheduled for Friday afternoon at a boutique hotel downtown. It was the perfect opportunity. If Robert and Carol wanted to play house, I'd make sure their curtain call was unforgettable. On Friday, I arrived at the hotel an hour early, blending into the lobby with a coffee and a newspaper. It was a busy day, travelers checking in, couples rushing to their rooms. When Carol arrived, she looked every bit the woman she'd been pretending to be, a confident, polished, and oblivious to the storm brewing around her. She walked straight to the elevator, not even glancing around. I followed her, keeping a safe distance as she entered the elevator and pressed the button for the 12th floor. A hotel staff member held the door open for me, and I casually stepped inside, selecting the 14th floor. My heart wasn't racing, my hands weren't shaking, I was in full control, my mind as sharp as a blade. When the elevator dinged for her floor, I watched as she stepped out, heading toward her room with purposeful strides. I waited until the elevator doors closed and then took the stairs down 2 flights, giving her just enough time to settle in. I approached the front desk, pulling out my phone and showing the hotel manager the picture of Robert and Carol that I'd captured during one of their public meetings. I introduced myself as her husband and calmly explained the situation, pointing to the room number I'd seen her enter. "I'd like a copy of the bill," I said, my voice steady but firm. "And I believe you should know what kind of guests you're hosting." The manager, clearly uncomfortable but cooperative, nodded. Within minutes, I had a printout of the charges associated with the room, dinners, champagne, and an extended stay. My suspicions were now fully confirmed. But I wasn't done yet. With the bill in hand, I headed straight to the hotel's conference room, where I knew Robert's colleagues were holding a meeting. I slipped the bill under the door with a simple note attached. I asked him about his business expenses. Then I left the hotel, my steps calm and measured. Carol and Robert were enjoying their time upstairs, completely unaware of the chaos I had just set in motion. By the time they walked out of that room, their world would never be the same. By Saturday morning, the fallout from my planted evidence had started to spread. The email I'd sent to Robert's colleagues with the hotel bill and my note had worked like a grenade tossed into a crowded room. By the time I checked the corporate message boards, the whispers had turned into full-blown speculation. Screenshots of the bill and my note were circulating, and Robert's name was now tied to phrases like misuse of company funds and inappropriate conduct. But Robert wasn't my only target. Carol, still blissfully unaware, spent the morning as if nothing was amiss. She hummed a tune while folding laundry, occasionally glancing at her phone. I imagined she was texting Robert, assuring him that their little escapade had gone unnoticed. She had no idea how wrong she was. That afternoon, I prepared for phase 2. I contacted the spouse of one of Carol's closest friends, Jennifer. Jennifer had always been a bit of a gossip, and her husband, Steve, was just as talkative. Over the years, Steve and I had shared a few beers, swapping harmless stories about our lives. This time, I had a purpose. "Steve," I began, my voice measured, "have you ever wondered what Carol and Robert are really up to on all those work meetings?" There was a pause, followed by a nervous chuckle. "What do you mean?" I didn't hold back. I told him everything, the emails, the photos, the receipts. I painted a picture so vivid that Steve was stunned into silence. Then I dropped the final piece of bait. Jennifer might want to be careful. Carol's been using her as an excuse for some of these meetings. By the time I hung up, I knew the dominoes were falling. Jennifer's social circle was small but influential. Within hours, I could already sense the ripple effects. Carol's friends began texting her, their messages vague but probing. "Hey, I heard something strange. Is everything okay?" Carol's casual demeanor started to crack. That evening, she spent more time than usual glued to her phone, her face tightening with every new notification. She didn't say much during dinner, and for the first time in weeks, she looked nervous. That night, while she was upstairs on a call, I took my preparations a step further. I printed copies of every piece of evidence I had gathered, the hotel receipts, text messages, and photos. I slipped them into manila envelopes, each one labeled with a name, her boss, Robert's wife, and the HR department at their company. Then I added one last touch. I found an old video of Carol and me from years ago, laughing at a barbecue with friends. I edited it into a short clip with a single line of text at the end, remember when life was honest? The next morning, I mailed the envelopes. Every piece of evidence was now in motion, heading straight for its intended target. By the time Carol and Robert realized what was happening, it would be too late to stop it. But I wasn't finished yet. My plan wasn't just about exposing them, it was about making sure they felt the weight of every choice they'd made. As Carol walked into the kitchen that morning, yawning and stretching like nothing had changed, I watched her with cold detachment. She reached for the coffee pot, oblivious to the storm I had unleashed. "You seem quiet today," she said, glancing over her shoulder. I smiled faintly. "Just thinking," I replied. If only she knew what I was thinking about. Sunday morning started like any other, quiet, routine, deceptively normal. Carol was up early, making breakfast in the kitchen. She greeted me with a cheerful good morning, as if her world wasn't crumbling piece by piece. But I could see it now, the small cracks in her composure, the way she checked her phone more often than usual, the way her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. I took a seat at the table, sipping my coffee as she set down a plate of scrambled eggs in front of me. "Anything special planned for today?" she asked, her tone casual. "Not much," I replied. "Just catching up on a few things." In truth, I was watching the clock. I knew exactly when the envelopes I'd sent would be delivered, and I was ready for the storm they would unleash. By noon, it began. Her phone buzzed on the counter, and she glanced at it quickly, her face tightening. Another buzz, and another. Her calm facade was slipping. I stood nearby, pretending to be absorbed in reading the news on my tablet, but I didn't miss the way her fingers trembled as she typed out a reply. "Everything okay?" I asked, keeping my tone light. She looked up, startled, her smile forced. "Oh, yeah. Just work stuff." Work stuff. How fitting. By mid-afternoon, Carol had retreated upstairs with her phone, leaving me alone in the living room. I could hear the muffled sound of her voice through the closed door as she made frantic phone calls. I imagined the conversations, Robert, panicked and trying to manage the fallout from the emails and receipts. Her boss, likely furious that her personal drama was leaking into the company's reputation. And perhaps worst of all, Robert's wife, whose silence would be far more terrifying than any angry outburst. I stayed calm, methodical. There was no need to rush. The pieces were falling exactly where I wanted them to. At 4 p.m., the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Steve, Jennifer's husband, standing there with a grim expression. "Can we talk?" he asked. I invited him in, offering him a drink, but he waved it off. "What's going on with Carol?" he demanded. "Jennifer says you've been telling people things. She's freaking out, and now I'm hearing rumors about Robert." I didn't deny it. Instead, I calmly walked to my desk and pulled out the stack of evidence I'd prepared. "Steve," I said, setting the papers in front of him, "I didn't start the fire. I just let people see the smoke." He scanned the documents, his face darkening with each passing second. "This is bad," he muttered. "Really bad." "It's the truth," I said simply. Steve left shortly after, muttering something about needing to talk to Jennifer. I let him go, knowing that by the end of the day, Carol's little web of lies would be completely exposed. That evening, she came downstairs, her face pale, her usual confidence gone. She didn't speak, didn't even look at me, just poured herself a glass of wine and stared out the window. The silence was deafening. Finally, I broke it. "Rough day?" She flinched, as if the words physically hit her. "It's just work stress," she mumbled. I didn't press her. "Not yet." Let her squirm a little longer. As she sat there, lost in thought, I smiled to myself. She didn't know it yet, but she was already trapped. The walls were closing in, and there was no way out. Monday morning arrived with an ominous calm. Carol was out of bed early, moving through the house like a ghost. Her usual cheerful morning routine was gone, replaced by hurried movements and a furrowed brow. She barely looked at me as she grabbed her keys and left for work, muttering something about an important meeting. I sipped my coffee at the kitchen table, waiting. It was only a matter of time before the chaos I had unleashed consumed every part of her carefully constructed life. By mid-morning, my phone buzzed with a text from Steve. "You need to see this. Check your email." I opened the message and found an attached screenshot of a group chat between Carol's closest friends. It was a digital battlefield. Messages flew back and forth, accusing, questioning, unraveling years of trust. Jennifer had shared what she'd learned from Steve, and now the entire group knew about Carol and Robert's affair. "I can't believe she used me as an excuse," one message read. "Doesn't she realize what this could do to all of us?" wrote another. The same women who once sang Carol's praises were now tearing her apart. And that was only the beginning. At work, Carol's problems were multiplying. By noon, I received another update, this time from Tony. He had a friend in HR at Robert's company, and it seemed the fallout from the hotel receipts had reached the top brass. Robert was being investigated for misappropriation of funds, and Carol's name had come up in the process. But the crowning jewel of the day came when I checked the shared cloud folder I had access to. Among the usual work files, I found an email draft Carol had written but hadn't yet sent. It was addressed to Robert, filled with desperation. "Robert, we need to figure this out. People are starting to ask questions. My friends are turning against me, and I think someone's been following us. We have to talk." I stared at the screen, my mind racing. She was breaking. The woman who once thought she could outsmart everyone was starting to see the cracks in her world. But she still didn't know the full extent of what was coming. That evening, I stayed calm as Carol came home. Her movements were jittery, her expression tense. She glanced at me, forcing a smile. "Long day at work," she said, dropping her bag by the door. "Everything okay?" I asked, feigning concern. She hesitated, her smile faltering. "Yeah, just a lot going on." I nodded, watching her closely. She didn't realize it, but every action, every word, was another thread in the web tightening around her. Later that night, as she showered, I accessed her laptop again. I copied the draft email and sent it to Robert's wife from an anonymous email account, along with the hotel receipts and a message of my own. "You deserve to know the truth. Ask your husband about these." The satisfaction I felt was cold and calculated. They thought they could play with people's lives, but now they would face the consequences of their choices. By the time Carol went to bed, I had already sent another email, this one to her boss, attaching the same evidence. Her career, her friendships, her relationship with Robert, they were all hanging by a thread. And I was holding the scissors. She didn't know it yet, but her world was about to come crashing down. Tuesday morning started differently than usual. Carol was up early, but the calm efficiency she usually displayed was gone. She moved through the kitchen in a flurry, her phone glued to her hand. Notifications chimed relentlessly, and her face grew more tense with each passing second. I sat at the table, pretending to skim the morning news on my tablet. In truth, I was watching her every move. Her once flawless composure was unraveling, and I wanted to savor every second of it. "Rough morning?" I asked casually, not even looking up. Her head snapped toward me, startled. What? No. Just busy. A lot going on at work, she said, her voice clipped and hurried. I nodded, letting the silence settle back into the room. By mid-morning, Carol was out the door, but I knew she wasn't going to have an easy day. The seeds I'd planted were blooming in ways she couldn't stop. I opened my laptop and checked the shared cloud folder, knowing full well she'd been trying to cover her tracks. But there was no hiding now, not from me. The emails between her and Robert had become desperate. This is out of control. HR is all over me, and my wife hasn't spoken to me in days. Did you say anything to anyone? Robert wrote. Of course not. But someone knows, and it's getting worse. We need to lay low, she replied. Lay low. The words made me smirk. She still believed she could outrun the storm, but she didn't know I was the one steering it. Around noon, my phone buzzed with a call from Carol. Her voice was shaky, almost unrecognizable. I'm coming home early, she said. We need to talk. When she walked through the door, she didn't look like the composed woman I once knew. Her hair was disheveled, her makeup smudged, and her usual air of confidence was nowhere to be found. She hesitated in the doorway, clutching her bag like a lifeline. What's going on? I asked, setting down my coffee cup. Her mouth opened and closed like she was searching for the right words. Finally, she stammered, something happened at work. There are accusations. Accusations? I repeated, tilting my head. What kind of accusations? Her eyes darted around the room, refusing to meet mine. About me and Robert. People are saying we're involved. I leaned back in my chair, letting out a low laugh. Well, that's ridiculous, isn't it? You'd never do something like that. Her face crumpled as she gripped the edge of the table. It's not true, she whispered, though her voice cracked under the weight of the lie. They're just trying to destroy me. I stood slowly, towering over her. People don't make up stories out of thin air, Carol. What did you expect? That no one would notice? Her lip quivered, tears spilling down her cheeks. I didn't mean for any of this to happen, she choked out. I stared at her, my expression cold. You didn't mean for it to happen, or you didn't mean for me to find out? She didn't answer. She just collapsed into a chair, burying her face in her hands. Later that evening, as she hid in the bedroom, I checked her email again. There it was, an official notice from her company. She was being placed on administrative leave pending an investigation. Her career, her reputation, it was all slipping away. I watched her through the crack in the door as she sat on the edge of the bed, staring blankly at her phone. She had no idea how much further she still had to fall. By Wednesday morning, Carol's world was barely holding together. She stayed locked in the bedroom for hours, the sound of her frantic pacing drifting down the hallway. The woman who once carried herself with unshakable confidence now seemed like a shadow, desperate and cornered. I let her stew in her chaos, knowing the time for the final confrontation had come. Everything I'd been building toward was ready. I didn't just want her to feel exposed, I wanted her to truly understand the weight of her betrayal. At exactly 2 p.m., I walked into the living room with a thick folder in hand. Carol was sitting on the couch, staring blankly at the television, though the screen wasn't even on. A half-empty glass of wine sat on the coffee table, and her laptop was open to an email chain. We need to talk, I said evenly. Her head snapped up, her eyes red and swollen. What is it? She asked, her voice small. I sat down across from her, placing the folder on the table between us. This, I said, pointing to it, is the truth. Everything you've been hiding. Everything you thought you got away with. Her hands trembled as she reached for the folder. I don't, she began, but I cut her off. Open it, I said sharply. Slowly, she pulled out the documents, photos of her with Robert, receipts from their hotel stays, printed copies of their messages, and even a timeline I had pieced together of her lies. With each page she turned, her breathing became more shallow, her face more ashen. She started, but no words came. Don't, I said, my voice cold. No more excuses. No more lies. Tears streamed down her face as she clutched the papers in her lap. I didn't mean for it to go this far, she whispered. I made a mistake. I leaned forward, locking eyes with her. A mistake? I repeated, my tone dripping with contempt. Mistakes happen once, Carol. What you did was a choice. Over and over again, you chose to lie, to cheat, to destroy everything we built. She tried to reach out for my hand, but I pulled back. Please, she begged. We can fix this. We can go to counseling, start over. I stood, towering over her. There's no fixing this. You broke it. You broke us. And now, you're going to face the consequences. Before she could respond, I pulled out my phone and hit send. The email I had been preparing for weeks went out instantly, loaded with every piece of evidence I'd gathered. Her boss, her closest friends, Robert's wife, even our kids, everyone who mattered now knew the truth. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table, then again, and again. She grabbed it with shaking hands, her face crumpling as she read the incoming messages. What did you do? She stammered, her voice breaking. I met her gaze, unflinching. I told the truth. Something you clearly couldn't do. She fell to her knees, clutching the phone like it was her last lifeline. You've ruined me, she sobbed. No, Carol, I said calmly. You ruined yourself. I turned and walked out of the house, leaving her behind in a storm of her own making. As I stepped into my car, a strange sense of peace washed over me. The weight I had carried for weeks, months, even, was finally gone. Driving away, I didn't look back. The life we'd shared was over, and for the first time, I was free to start anew.